I'm Purav Desai. I'm a Microsoft 365 incident responder in financial services. I've got nearly over 5 years experience across the whole Microsoft security stack. And I do content on LinkedIn and GitHub to encourage people into cyber and also share kind of insights throughout my journey. Speaking of getting people into cyber, I worked with you guys last year on a really good interview. So I'm excited to be back for a follow-up. You know what's funny? It's probably the most common question I get asked to say, how do I get into cyber? And I think me doing that talk is like basically an easy way to have a resource to give to someone that they can consume themselves, take whatever resonates with them and get inspired or get some direction, however they want to deal with it. So that's been invaluable because, yeah, the amount of times I get that question in my DM and I could just be like, hey, here's a talk I've done on this or an interview I've done on this. Watch it. Let me know what you think. It's been really invaluable for that. And I think overall, yeah, it's definitely helped my reach in the LinkedIn space and just generally getting my name out there because a lot of people are trying to get in. So they're searching, how do I break in, etc. And they'll come across the posts, one of the posts that you guys did or my post, and then reach out to me to say, hey, I saw your post, etc. So it's really been helpful. But yeah, I'm grateful to you guys for the platform that you gave me last year to share my story. I think it's helped a lot of people and I'm really proud of that. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that's changed since we last spoke, I think AI has really blown up, right? Like it's definitely taken center stage. A lot of different attacks and techniques that attackers are using AI. So it's really interesting to see how that develops. And there's also been a few catastrophic scenarios, shall we say, like CrowdStrike from a few weeks ago that I'm sure most people listening will be aware of. In terms of like previous questions, the few that I'd update is like how I've added value, because I think the last time we spoke, I was just about starting my role. I didn't have too much to say on that. What I can say is I've really helped build the incident response capability. I've taken on new sort of projects and tools. I've been pioneering those solutions in our team and our organization and helping cross-skill everyone on Microsoft security. So it's been a really kind of fun journey. And yeah, I'm constantly adding value there. And I think favorite tools, because of what I do day to day, like Purview Compliance, which is like the Microsoft kind of compliance suite of tooling, has closely become my favorite tools just because I'm using them so much. And it's allowed me to really share content about them. So I'm getting a love relationship, I think, with them. Whereas like 2 years ago, I didn't even know they existed. So it's really interesting how your mindset and what you get exposed to can change based on the roles you're in. And then the question, I think previously you asked me about certifications. So since we last spoke, I got the AZ500, which is the Azure Security Engineer certificate. So I got that last November. And that one was a really tough exam. I think it's the hardest one I've taken so far because I nearly ran out of time and there was a lab right at the end that they snuck in, but I still managed to clear it and pass it with a decent score. So I'm happy. But yeah, that's a bit about kind of what's changed in the industry and how I'd answer some of those questions differently as well. Yeah, so I think there's two things to it. One, it can definitely help you when you're trying to find new jobs because it's a talking point in interviews. It certainly has been for me. It will catch people's eye, when looking at my CV, and then they'll ask me questions about it in the interview. I think additionally, it can show passion and, expertise to a degree as well, depending on what you're sharing. But I think mainly the passion, because if you're getting into cyber for the first time, an organization will be more willing to take someone who's shown that they've kind of at least made some effort to try and understand something, they've documented, etc. They're almost like doing the role without getting paid for it to a degree, like a very kind of low level version of it. And I think it also helps unlock opportunities. Like I've constantly had recruiters reach out to me through the years because of the posts they've seen, and some may have led to opportunities or some led to interviews at least. And then, had not been for the post, maybe they wouldn't have even discovered me in the first place. And I think, in the essence or the sort of era we're in now, a lot of companies are making layoffs, etc. So for people considering going independent, building that self brand through, your posts and content and building kind of a loyal following could potentially turn into clients in the future if you do go independent. So I think sort of triple threat of benefits there as well that I can say. Yeah, it's a really great question. And you know what? I think there's a bit of a misconception. Like a lot of people get intimidated. Like, how do I even start, right? Like you see someone doing like these fancy videos or like these really detailed posts, and it's just like, where do I even begin? So what I'd say is the way I started was like just watching content that was already there, so like webinars, etc., and then kind of doing your own recap posts with any takeaways that you had specifically or any sort of actions you're going to take because of that talk. that does a few things, right? One, you can tag the person that did the webinar, so they're grateful for the reach. They may connect with you, they may look into your post and help, but also it can help other people find you because maybe they're searching for that content. And also it will kind of build your writing ability. Like a lot of people maybe are kind of worried, like, oh, I don't know, like English may not be a first language, or maybe I'm bad at grammar or whatever it is. Just write something as best you can and comfortably as you can, and then you only get better with time, right? But yeah, what I would say is if you're getting a bit intimidated with like, I'm not confident enough to make my own content, etc., just start with content that's out there, because each of us will have a unique takeaway or something that resonates with us, and it's worth sharing that because that's a really unique perspective and adds a lot of value to that content that the person that created that content would definitely appreciate when you tag them in the post on LinkedIn, for example. So yeah, that's a bit about how to get started and what personally I started with as well. Yeah, this is a really good question because I'm not as consistent as I'd like to be. So I'm practicing, but I don't preach. But to a degree, I mean, what I will say is if you have some content, like let's say you could make a series, right? Like my Deciphering UAL series, which I know we'll come on to shortly, then you can kind of almost pre-plan the content because you'll know part one is this, part two is this, part three is this. So start drafting those ideas, start having those posts somewhat in a final state, schedule them when you're ready. And that way, then you don't need to worry about consistency because they're taken care of. In terms of what posts like kind of hit, pay attention to market trends. For example, during the CrowdStrike thing, there were a lot of memes. Even during the Olympics recently, there's been a lot of memes. Find a way to incorporate that into your posts. A lot of humor posts do really, really well because LinkedIn has that laugh reaction kind of thing, and a lot of people will react in that way. So it's about kind of blending a bit of technical kind of insight, knowledge, but also add some humor. Those really do well. And, add some visuals, like if you've got any pictures or videos that go along with it, because no one wants to see a wall of text when they're scrolling, right? It's just really off-putting and it's not going to catch people's eye. So find some creative image, if you want to use AI to generate that image for free, or find some other image that you can either make yourself or find online to sort of add that value as well. And then, yeah, I think just in terms of consistency, like once you find what you really like posting about, maybe because it gets really good reach, or maybe just because you're really interested in the topic, then try and do at least a post. I would say at least once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, because otherwise people will kind of sadly forget you because there's just so many people in this space, right? But again, as you get bigger, you can slow down that, right? Because once you have that established following, you know that they're going to keep coming back for more, right? They all come back, as they say. So with that, you can basically, slow down your kind of content frequency, but make your content more high value and high rich that, not any Tom, Dick, and Harry can basically generate. And then people won't mind waiting for that. But while you're starting, be as consistent as you can to catch as many eyes as you can while you're building that initial following. Yeah, sure. So deciphering UAL. So what is the UAL? So the UAL is like the Unified Audit Log. And to keep things simple, it's basically a place where all activities that someone takes in M365 would be logged. So stuff like sending an email, uploading a file to SharePoint, adding a member to a role group, etc. All of those would kind of be logged. And what I noticed and what led me to create the series is that there's a lot of these kind of mysterious hidden fields like GUIDs or random IDs that Microsoft use. So if someone's looking at like, oh, Holly uploaded this file, okay, well, what did she classify it with? Like what sensitivity label, which is a way to classify data if it's confidential, sensitive, etc. What label did she use? Well, in the logs, it would only show like the GUID, and that GUID means nothing to no one, right? So how do you kind of make sense of that? You have to decipher it, and hence the Deciphering UAL series. And there was quite a few activities like that I noticed that had those GUIDs and things. And when I first got started, I was reaching out in the community to ask other people who might know. No one knew, and I couldn't find anything online. So I took it as a challenge to myself to kind of figure it out. And then once I got comfortable, I was like, you know what, I'm going to contribute this as my own niche content. And, some people in the audience may be aware, I recently got the Microsoft Award for MVP. But initially, when I was kind of going on that MVP journey, one thing that's really helpful is to have a niche piece of content that's adding a lot of value to the community. And so I knew that UAL deciphering would be my niche. And that's kind of what I dove into it. In terms of using GitHub as a platform, yeah, I mean, GitHub traditionally is thought of like more for code, etc. But you can do a lot with it because you can add, links to other content you've done. And the way I've leveraged GitHub is it's basically my cyber portfolio. So if someone wants to just see everything I've done, like certifications, posts, talks like this one, interviews, etc. All of it's just on GitHub. And also it's allowed me to create that series to contribute content back. So I'd say, for people looking for like an easy way to showcase what they've done, consider setting up a GitHub because it's really easy. There's tons of YouTube videos, and you don't need to code as well. Like you can do everything in the browser, just edit normally with text and add images, etc. But if you want to build more technically, you can sort of look into pipelines and things to automate your, content being pushed to GitHub, etc. So yeah, so that's a bit about deciphering UAL and how I particularly use GitHub. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, a lot of people were worried about AI kind of taking jobs, and it can take some jobs. In terms of security, it could potentially easily take level one, because when I was a level one SOC analyst, like all you're doing is you get an indicator, like let's say a hash or a website, etc. You're looking for that reputation about it, right? So you'd put it into sites like VirusTotal, etc. All of that can be kind of scripted, automated with AI. AI could maybe even enrich it with any threat intel that it can gather on the dark web, etc., to really give a confident level on those. So that could be a bit of a concern. But what I will say is AI is not going to replace things like where you need to threat hunt, or maybe where you need to do more life cycle stuff like incident response. And I think in terms of challenges, right, one, it costs a lot for Security Copilot. Like Microsoft recommend, a few SEUs, and I think it works out to roughly like $4,000 a month or something crazy like that. And it's just, yeah, it's really expensive. So I think that's one challenge. And then the other challenge is, of course, what sort of data is actually being fed into it? Are you limiting that from your control perspective? Is anything sensitive going to that AI that's being used to enhance it, but also potentially exposing your company? So I think it's good and bad, right? I mean, the other good thing, apart from helping, I won't say eliminate tier one, because ideally tier one should be kind of moved up to tier two, and then tier two should be moved to tier three. That's the kind of positive way to look at like AI and Copilot, right? It shouldn't replace, I mean, it does replace, but it should allow the people that it does replace to move up to the next level. And I think additionally, it can provide a lot of enrichment because it could ingest like what incidents your company has had previously. So if that occurs again, it could maybe spit out a quick playbook to say, this is how you dealt with it last time, here's your cheat sheet, etc. Go ahead and fix it in the same way, because it's kind of learning from its own, life cycle of information it's being fed through dealing with the incidents it's ingesting. So yeah, while some companies may be a bit scared or risk averse, etc., I would say embrace it. It is really costly at the moment, so you could easily get away without even entertaining it. I personally haven't seen it much at all, but it is something that will be more in demand. I know most of this interview is how to get into cyber. I'm sure a lot of job descriptions, if they're not already, will start asking for AI and AI security in the very near future. So it's a skill to maybe pick up on the side, etc. Yeah, hopefully that helps. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I would say firstly, make sure your logging is configured and you have the right licensing for any products, etc. So one thing, for example, is like if you have virtual machines in Azure, the Defender for Virtual, or what's it called now, Defender for Servers, is a separate kind of license that you need to purchase on the subscription. Without that, you're not going to get notified about any sort of attacks on the VM. You may not get the compliance kind of health status, etc. So make sure that if you're going to provision and move to the cloud, look at what resources are in scope, right? What services are you looking to use? And if virtual machines, one of them, for example, look at how can you protect that, which would be Defender for Servers. So make sure you have adequate budget, adequate approval, etc. Understand how to provision it, etc. Because the last thing you want is you've got virtual machines there that are open to the internet and getting brute forced and Bitcoin mining and all sorts, right? So that's definitely one best practice to bear in mind. And I think, coming from a sort of a forensics background now, I would say make sure your logging is configured correctly. So all your Azure resources, anyone that kind of starts a VM, shuts down a VM, etc., should all be configured to go to either a log analytics workspace, a third-party SIM perhaps, or even a storage account, just somewhere where you can track it and look back on it should an incident occur in the near future. In terms of like common pitfalls, I have seen, for example, in the past, people using like Azure Key Vault. And what they'll do is rather than kind of creating a granular policy that would only allow sort of select people to not only see the keys, but also limited in terms of what they can do with the keys. Like ideally, they should only be able to maybe read the keys because they have some script that needs to, decrypt something or something. So they need to see the key to actually be able to use it, etc. But I've seen, that be badly misconfigured and then people can delete keys, etc. But they shouldn't be able to delete keys because they should only have read-only permissions. So if you architect it and configure it correctly in the first place, then you can avoid that pitfall. So yeah, those are a few kind of best practices and one sort of pitfall that I've seen, at least for Azure so far. Yeah, you know what? I think Zinc was like the first, if not the first, kind of speaking engagement or interview I kind of gave. And obviously, I used that as a way to approach others, shall we say, right? Other platforms that gave me a chance to kind of share my story or my insight. And there's been quite a few. I've also appeared on a few podcasts, collaborated with a few YouTubers. But some of the key highlights that I want to mention, right? So I had a really cool opportunity to be a technical reviewer for a book by a publishing company called Orange AVA. Interestingly, that book is to help people with a particular certification, which is the SC100, which is the Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect certification. What was interesting was that they asked me to be a technical reviewer for it, knowing that I didn't have that certification. And actually, I'm planning to get that certification by end of the year. So maybe when people look back on this in 2025, they'll see that I have that certification, hopefully. But at the time, it was quite intimidating because I was like, I haven't actually done this certification. Like, how can I review it? But they gave me good confidence. They'd seen my posts. Maybe they even saw the previous Zinc interview. That kind of added that credibility. And so they gave me the opportunity. I took it on. I succeeded. I did it well. And now basically my name's featured in a book. And I think that's a really cool thing. Like, when family come around now, not to flex or humble brag or whatever, but it's nice to just get that book out and show them like, hey, this is kind of what I'm doing. Because, some people don't understand cybersecurity and it can be quite confusing with all these different terms, but showing kind of these opportunities like appearing on YouTube or appearing in a book is like universally translatable. Like it's not like a technical barrier needs to be met to understand that. So that was a really cool opportunity. And I've actually got another one coming up where I'm co-authoring a book with another publishing company, which is Pact on e-discovery. So look out for that in the coming months or maybe a year or so. We'll see. And I think other than that, I've been, the security MVP that I mentioned a while ago, I think that's a really massive achievement because that's been a sort of a dream of mine. I don't know, at least a few years now. And I think it was last year where I was like, you know what, let me try and actually work towards this like more actively. And I think finding that niche content that I mentioned earlier around the forensics piece really kind of drove me forward to say, I really want to get good at this. I really want to make this my niche. I really want to do this regularly. And I want to unlock more speaking engagements to hopefully earn MVP. And even with MVP, for people unaware, there's a bit of a process. So firstly, you need to get nominated. You either get nominated by someone who already has MVP or someone from Microsoft. In my case, a fellow MVP reached out to me last year. At that point, I was still getting started. Like I didn't have that many kind of engagements or contributions, but I went through it and ultimately I didn't make the cut because, I got nominated, then you submit the application and then they decide if you actually make the cut or not. But I wasn't disheartened at all because if you think to the Oscars, there's nominations 6, but there's only one winner, but the 6 nominations can still be proud that they even reached the final stage. So that's the kind of way I took it in my stride. But earlier this year, I got renominated by another MVP and I had much more contributions. I had the book stuff to mention, I had the podcast, etc. to mention, and I was able to get MVP. I found out late last week. I'm not sure when this is going to go up, so I found out early August to get that award. And I think, it's I don't want to kind of speak about myself. I like when others do, but it's probably testament to what I've done over the last year in terms of the hard work and the contributions, etc. So yeah, I think those two have been really good achievements. Obviously SC100, as I mentioned, the cybersecurity architect certification by end of the year, and just kind of wishing into existence. Maybe within a few years, I'd like to move to security architecture, because incident response is great, but it's very reactive. And I think my prior background has been more in consulting, where I'm a bit more strategically advising clients, etc. And architecture would be kind of a helpful blend of like how to make sure things are in place so that when an incident occurs, you can better deal with it. And also it'll allow me to sort of design some solutions, make sure they work in the first instance, and then hand them off to someone to operationally manage. Whereas currently I'm sort of in an operational role, and it takes me back to like being in a SOC analyst. Whereas between SOC analyst and now, I was more kind of strategic in my consulting engagements. So yeah, so those are a bit of the key achievements I think so far, and some of the things I've got in the works. But yeah, really, really excited to see what else unlocks, especially now with MVP. I've had a lot of recruiters and consultancies reaching out, so we'll see. And I think anyone listening trying to get into cyber, keep going. The market is quite tough right now, just being realistic, but hopefully things will improve and just, keep building your self brand, build your profile, start researching things, documenting them, add that extra value that you can to differentiate yourself from other candidates. And, hopefully you'll at least get interviews, and then through the interviews, eventually you'll land a role. So yeah, hopefully that helps, and all the best to anyone listening that's on the cyber journey.